No one arrived here by choice. Trains came full. They rarely left the same way. Behind barbed wire and watchtowers stood a place designed not just to imprison, but to erase. Names became numbers. Families were separated in seconds. And survival? It wasn't guaranteed by strength. It was decided moment by moment. Because inside Auschwitz, every day was a fight not just to live, but to remain human. The journey often began in silence. Packed tightly inside cattle cars, people were transported for days with little food, little water, and almost no air. No one knew exactly where they were going, only that it wasn't home. When the train finally stopped, confusion turned into fear. Orders were shouted, doors were thrown open, blinding light replaced darkness. This was Auschwitz. Men, women, and children were forced onto the platform. Within minutes, decisions were made that would shape their fate, often without explanation. Families were separated instantly. A gesture from a guard, a direction to the left or the right. No time to say goodbye, no understanding of what those choices meant. For many, this was the last moment they would see their loved ones. Those selected for labor were marched forward. Their belongings were taken, clothes replaced, hair cut, identity stripped away piece by piece. Names disappeared. Numbers took their place, tattooed, recorded, remembered only by the system that controlled them. Everything familiar was gone. Language barriers added to the confusion. Orders were given in languages many didn't understand. Mistakes could be punished instantly. The environment itself felt overwhelming. Barbed wire fences stretched endlessly. Guard towers watched from every angle. Smoke rose in the distance, constant, unexplained. New arrivals didn't yet know what it meant, but they felt it. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And as night fell over the camp for the first time, one realization began to settle in. This wasn't just a prison. It was a place where survival would depend on learning the rules very quickly. Morning didn't begin with sunrise. It began with shouting. Before the sky had fully lightened, prisoners were forced awake. There was no gentle start, only urgency. Roll call, known as appel, could last for hours. Prisoners stood in rows, unmoving, regardless of weather. Cold, rain, snow, it didn't matter. If someone collapsed, the line didn't break. Counting had to be exact. Every number had to match. Only then could the day begin. Food came next, if it could be called that. A thin liquid, sometimes resembling soup, often just flavored water. A small piece of bread, rationed carefully. It was never enough. Hunger became constant, not sharp, but always there, a quiet emptiness that followed every movement. Then came labor, long hours, repetitive tasks, carrying, digging, building, whatever was demanded. The work was exhausting, often beyond what the body could handle. But stopping wasn't an option. Supervisors watched closely. Punishments for slowing down could be immediate. So prisoners kept moving, even when they were weak, even when they were sick, even when their bodies were beginning to fail. Time felt distorted. Hours stretched endlessly, yet days blurred together. There was little difference between one day and the next. Survival became routine. Find a way to stand during roll call, save a piece of bread for later, avoid attention, stay in line, stay quiet, stay alive. Because inside Auschwitz, survival wasn't about long-term plans. It was about making it through the next hour, and then the next. Over time, the body began to change. Not all at once, slowly, almost quietly. Clothes hung looser, steps became heavier, strength faded in ways that were impossible to stop. Hunger became no longer just a feeling, it became a constant state of being. Every thought began to revolve around food, a crumb saved, a crust shared, a memory of a meal from another life. But memories didn't fill the emptiness. The cold made everything worse. Winters inside Auschwitz Concentration Camp were relentless. Thin clothing offered little protection. Nights were long, sleep was broken, restless, often interrupted. Warmth became something distant, something remembered but rarely felt. Illness spread easily. Bodies weakened by hunger couldn't fight it. Minor sickness turned serious quickly. There was little medical care and even less rest. Yet work continued. It had to, because falling behind meant drawing attention, and attention was dangerous. Some prisoners learned to adapt in small ways, walking slower to conserve energy, standing near others for warmth, sharing what little they had. Not everyone could. The line between endurance and collapse grew thinner every day. And then came the moment many feared most, when the body simply refused to continue, when standing became impossible, when the will to move disappeared. Because inside Auschwitz, survival wasn't just physical. It required something deeper, something harder to hold on to with each passing day. The will to keep going, even when everything around you was designed to make you stop. Fear was constant, not loud, not always visible, but always there. It lived in every glance, every order, every step taken too slowly. Inside Auschwitz Concentration Camp, uncertainty was part of daily life. No one knew what the next hour would bring. A change in assignment, a sudden inspection, a name called from the line. Each possibility carried weight, because outcomes were unpredictable. Loss became familiar. People disappeared, sometimes overnight. A person who stood beside you yesterday, simply gone the next morning. No explanation, no goodbye. Over time, prisoners learned to not ask questions, but they never stopped noticing. And yet, even in this environment, something remarkable happened. Small acts of humanity survived. A shared piece of bread, a quiet warning, a glance that said, "You're not alone." These moments were brief, almost invisible, but they mattered, because they pushed back, however slightly, against the system designed to strip everything away. Some held on to routines from their past lives, whispered prayers, silent memories, repeating names of loved ones just to keep them alive in their minds. Others formed quiet bonds, not friendships in the usual sense, but connections built on shared survival. Because even in a place designed to dehumanize, people tried to remain human, and that was its own kind of resistance. But the strain was constant. Fear, loss, exhaustion, all pressing down, day after day. And as time went on, one question became harder to ignore. Not just how long can the body endure, but how long can the mind hold on? For those who survived, leaving Auschwitz concentration camp wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. Silence. Because how do you explain a place like that? How do you describe days where survival depended on chance, on timing, on decisions made in seconds? Many survivors carried memories that were difficult to put into words, not because they didn't want to speak, but because language often felt too small, too limited to capture what they had seen, what they had endured. Some tried to rebuild their lives, to find normalcy again, to reconnect with a world that had moved on while they were trapped inside something unimaginable. But the past didn't disappear. It stayed, in quiet moments, in memories triggered by the smallest things, a smell, a sound, a cold morning. And yet, many chose to speak, to share their stories, not for attention, but for truth, because remembering became a responsibility, a way to ensure that what happened would not be denied, forgotten, or repeated. Today, the site stands as a place of memory, not just of loss, but of resilience, of lives interrupted, of voices that were nearly erased, but endured. And perhaps that is the most important part of this story. Not just how people suffered, but how, even in the darkest conditions imaginable, some survived.